Good? We think?
It says it.
All right, so it's good. All right. We've been having trouble with our camera, so apologies to those of you who've been trying to watch the sermons on YouTube because they haven't been there in English. We get them in Spanish, and then we've had trouble in English, but we're thumbs up. Here we go. So over these last few weeks, we've been on a journey looking at the process of transformation in the grace of God, and we've used 3 words to talk succinctly about that process, that we start in a place of order, and then we move into a period of, disorder, thank you, and then we come into a new period of reorder, order, disorder, reorder. And we looked at how this process begins in Jesus' baptism when Jesus himself experiences God to speak the words over his life, "You are my child, my beloved, I am pleased with you." And Jesus' experience at the depth of his being of the truth of that propels him to figure out how that message can then be shared with every other human being. The 2nd chapter of John's Gospel, Jesus turns water to wine, water that was in the purification ritual containers at a wedding, and which becomes wine, which is so much more, so much bigger symbol of abundance than the system of purity, which had been so important for the Jews' identity and for their religious, their way of being religious and their way of worshiping God. The system of cleansing and deciding who's in and who is not, who is clean and who is unclean. And Jesus takes that system and with this water to wine experience explodes it and says, there is something so much bigger coming, just watch. And last week we looked at Nicodemus, Pharisee, educated, leader, top of his community and culture, who comes to Jesus but cannot wrap his head around what Jesus is offering. To be made new from above, to be born again from above, to be given a new dimension to life. And Nicodemus can't get there. Can't get there. So the question that kind of lingers after that encounter is, well, if Nicodemus, as Jesus says, you're a teacher and a leader of the people, if you don't understand these things, then who will? And the answer is what we have today. A Samaritan woman, no less. Now, it's hard for us to really grasp what that word Samaritan would mean to a Jew. The Jews lived for 3 kings under a united kingdom: Saul, David, and Solomon. And the kingdom extended from the northern regions of Galilee all the way down to the area just below the Dead Sea. That was what they ruled over. But at the end of Solomon's reign, there was a civil war. And the 12 tribes, which were all brothers under Jacob, right? They were all kin, they were all brothers. 10 of those tribes, the northern tribes, break from the southern tribes, the 2 in the south. Jerusalem becomes the capital for the southern kingdom, and Shechem in Samaria becomes the place of worship for the northern tribes. And the division between these 2 is epic. Imagine, if you will, that the South won the Civil War. And not only that, but in that division, they not only claimed that the religion of the North was evil, that all of the people who descended from that particular set of brothers were persona non grata, less than, because they had abandoned the true kingdom. That their way of life was degenerate. And then add 900 years of that prejudice being passed on from generation to generation. 900 years of that prejudice. That's what we're looking at in the enmity between the Jews of Judah and the Samaritans of the north. They weren't appreciated, to say the least. They had the same kinds of purity rules that segregation in the U.S. and apartheid in South Africa imposed. Separate bathrooms, you couldn't touch this, you couldn't eat out of the same bowl, you couldn't drink out of the same cup with a Samaritan, lest you be contaminated by their otherness. That's the degree that we're talking about. The idea that there could be a good Samaritan is ridiculous. It was an absolute, unthinkable thing. So, Jesus, who has been in Jerusalem, is traveling back to the north of Galilee, and he has to travel through Samaria to get to Galilee. And that's when he finds himself at the well at noon in Samaria. And while he's at the well, this woman comes out to get water. Now, we know now a little bit about what the enmity is between Jews and Samaritans, but what about the relationship between men and women during Jesus' time? What was the role or the place of a woman in Jesus' day? Well, a woman could not own property. A woman could not testify in court because her word was unreliable, because she was a woman. A woman was essentially considered the property of her husband, and she had no legal rights unless there was a man who stood up to speak for her. That's the place women had in Jesus' society. And so, this Samaritan woman, if you contrast her place in the world to the place that Nicodemus had in last week's text, Nicodemus is here. He is at the top. He is a leader in the community. He is well educated. He has power in the community. He's one of the decision makers in his community. This is where Nicodemus is. And this woman from Samaria, she's like down here on the ground somewhere in the social strata. You get the contrast? Who doesn't understand Jesus? Who does? And that is the core message in today's text. This Samaritan woman is extended with a different metaphor, the same invitation to transformation that Nicodemus got. To be changed, to be given life that is so abundant that it would never end, that it would flow continuously from within her, if she could grasp it. Like Nicodemus, she struggles at first. She's trying to figure out what Jesus is really saying. So you can give me water, but you don't even have a jug. How are you going to get any water when you don't have a jug? And why are you asking to share my jug anyway? Because you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan, and a woman at that. I don't understand you. You're disordering my reality. Do you hear it? You're disorganizing my frame of reference. I understand things like this because that's 900 years worth of history in my community and yours. And you are stepping out of that in a way that's uncomfortable. You want to share my cup? You're talking to me in public in the middle of the day? Who are you? I can offer you water, and you will never be thirsty again. Not water for your tongue, water for your soul, refreshment for the deepest place in yourself. And Jesus, interestingly, talks about that as water that will rise up from within her. She says, "Are you greater than Jacob, our father?" Well, 900 years ago, father, right? Like a long, 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 long time. More than that, probably thousands. And he says, "If you knew who I were, you would accept the water that I give. Go call your husband." "I don't have a husband." "That's right. You've been rejected 4 times by other men. And the one you're with now won't even take you as a wife." And she knows that this is no average conversation. Something much bigger is at work in her. She asks a question about the difference between the Jews and Samaritans. "But we worship here, and you Jews say we should worship in the temple." There's this religious conflict that separates us. How could your living water be good for me and my people, right? Because we're different. We do the God thing differently. And Jesus says, yes, that's true, but the time is coming when those who worship the Father will worship in spirit and in truth. It won't matter where you worship. It's not going to be about burnt offerings and animal sacrifice. It's going to be about something completely different that I am holding out to you as living water that will well up from within your very person. So, what is that? What is that wells up? I believe that what it is that wells up is that piece of God's presence that is gifted to every single human being because we are made in the image of God. It is a gift given. It is already there. But here's the paradox. Present though it may be, foundational though it may be to who you truly are, it does not become a living presence in you or in me unless, in the words of Richard Rohr, we recognize it, we honor it, and we allow it to function within us. So it's there, but it's not going to become a living stream, a living water in us until we recognize it, honor it, and allow it to flow through us. Allow it to be utilized to guide, direct, orient our lives. And that, I believe, is what Jesus is inviting her to. To recognize that what has divided his people from her people for all of these centuries is nothing, is minuscule in comparison to the thing that they share in common, which is that identity as beloved sons and daughters of God. All of us. That only when we grasp that fundamental reality do we have the potential to live, to experience the living, life-flowing gift of God's presence. As long as we hold on to our little ways of dissecting and dividing and destroying our shared humanity, we will struggle to experience the life-giving gift that Jesus holds out. Nicodemus couldn't get it because he's got so many layers of prejudice and privilege to walk through before he could get to that place. But this woman from down here, she's like, I understand what it means to have nothing, to be considered nothing by so many people. And for you to break through that, to reach through that, and to share your cup with me, to offer me something that nobody else thinks I'm even worthy of, for you to do that is utterly astonishing and lifts me in a way that I've never been lifted before. And she becomes then the first witness to Jesus. This non-Jewish Samaritan woman. She runs to the village and tells everyone, and they come. We didn't read the whole story because it's kind of long, but they come. This week I got an email from my friend Peter Aguilar, who's a Methodist pastor, and he sent a quote to me that he really liked and that I had never heard before from Dallas Willard. It's a wonderful quote, and I think it goes straight to the core of the invitation that Jesus makes to us in this passage. It says, discipleship is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if he were you. Discipleship is the process of becoming who Jesus would be if Jesus were you. It's not, when we sing, Cámbiame, Señor, hazme como tú. It's not like I want to grow long hair and have a beard and wear a robe and sandals, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about allowing the indwelling presence of God to shape my life, to reform my life, to transform my life so that my life becomes its own unique expression of that presence. Just like Jesus was his own unique expression of that presence in that body, in that time, you and I are called to that same purpose. That is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. To allow that same presence to shape me into the Jesus that I would be. Not the Jesus that Mary would be, or that Alex would be, or that Servando would be, or that Livy would be. I need to become my own presence incarnate. I need to let the vitality of God's indwelling self become fully mine. That's the unfolding. That's the living fountain of water that does not run dry. When we learn that that is at our core, that is the truest, biggest, most fundamental reality about who you are and who I am. When we grasp that, it changes the way we look at ourselves. It changes the way we look at every other person. And one of the consequences of that, here's the payoff, right? For this particular text today, here's the payoff. Two things. One, I must look at what my prejudices are that keep me from seeing that commonplace with every other person so that I can shed them and I, like Jesus, can share my cup with anyone. Anyone. So, what are they? And how can I begin to let the fountain of life that God has placed in me begin to dissolve and disassemble the prejudices that I carry? And we all have them. We all have them. And the second is, have I recognized that presence in my own life? Do I honor that presence in my own life? And am I employing that presence in my own life in the process of becoming the best example of Jesus' life that my life can become? That's the payoff. And you don't have to be a Nicodemus. In fact, it's probably a problem if you're a Nicodemus. It's going to be harder if you're a Nicodemus. Because the first one who really gets it is a Samaritan woman. Multiple times thrown to the curb, but finally discovering that she's a person of value, beloved of God. Let us pray. God, help us. Help us to shed the layers that we've allowed to accumulate. Help us to shed the prejudice that we have inherited. Help us to trust the truth that you really do dwell in us and will transform us from the inside out if we will recognize and honor and employ that presence every day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. invites us to this table, let us return our thanks with the gift of our tithes and our offerings.